Happy to welcome my first in-person guest this morning, Brad White. He's Executive Director of the Mississippi Department of Transportation. We're going to kind of walk through the last week and a half, what happened in terms of preparation, where did things go well, where do things need to be improved, and what do you learn from an event like this? But, Brad, I'd love to start, if you don't mind, with yesterday. You heard the conversation with Secretary Nome just a minute ago. You were part of the briefing. Were there for that roundtable discussion that she had with first responders. What did you take away from that yesterday?
Well, it was very comforting to see the interest that the Trump administration had in what was happening here. It was very clear that they've had members of FEMA's senior staff on the ground here throughout the duration of the storm and since. Not just getting information from us, but being here, seeing in real time what's happening. I thought the conversation was very positive. We kind of did what you were just saying, walked through what we were faced with, looked at what resources and tools we could have used that maybe we didn't have across the board, talked about the specific challenges that were specific to this particular ice storm. But it was a real positive meeting, and it left me, or I left there, feeling real comfortable that the Department of Homeland Security kind of has our back, and they are a partner in this, and we are working together across not just the various agencies within the state, but also the agencies within the federal government that are necessary to man up this upcoming recovery now that we'll be facing.
I thought it was interesting to hear Secretary Nome describe it as, the local, the cities and towns, it's their job to execute. The state has to administer, and the federal government with FEMA is there to assist in whatever way they can, primarily with resources.
Mm-hmm. And we had in the room locally was the Emergency Management Director, Evan, from Alcorn County. And some of the stories he told I had not heard before because they were outside of MDOT's jurisdiction.
Right.
But he did offer a very good picture of what our people on the ground were doing in the way of response, and it would leave you feeling proud for Mississippi.
Yeah. So really two elements to the storm that we're dealing with. We're dealing with how local communities have been impacted with all of the damage to their infrastructure and power lines and people without power and damage to their homes and their businesses. But then your piece of it, the Department of Transportation, highways and specifically the interstates. And we know that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday last week was a rough stretch. It's when you had the people that were stuck on Interstate 55 and I-22, and candidly, there are people that have been critical of the response that MDOT has had. So let's walk through, kind of from a preparation standpoint, what you thought was coming, what MDOT did to prepare, where we ended up, and then kind of the aftermath of that.
Sure. We started in our offices on the 20th, which would have been the Tuesday before the storm.
Okay. We
brought in an individual from the National Weather Service, the same guy that briefs MEMA and deals with them in their meetings. Met with all of our district engineers, all of our senior staff, and then we convened every day after that looking at what was coming and what impacted areas we thought we would have. In those early days, we knew for a fact that everything north of Highway 82 was going to get hit, that the ice storm was going to come through there. There was another, what they called a transitional phase that went as far south as I-20. And if you would draw a line, as we said before, from Natchez to Jackson and on up to Columbus, that could have been impacted. And so MDOT's broken down into 6 different regions that we operate our forces out of. And we were looking at the potential of 5 of those 6 being hit with the ice storm, and a couple of counties in the 6th district. So we began then mobilizing our people, putting folks out, getting equipment ready, getting the resources that we had ready in the way of the chemicals and the salt and all the things necessary to do pre-treatment and treatment of roads, and buckled in for what we thought would be coming. As the storm came through and went through, we realized that central Mississippi, capital city, and south, with the exception of some of that river corridor, kind of dodged the bullet. We didn't get hit as bad as what they thought it could be. So we ended up then with 3 districts across the south that had basically been unimpacted, and 3 of our districts across the north that had been impacted pretty severely from the Mississippi River all the way over to the Alabama line. And to give you an idea of what our system's like in that area, that's about 15,000 lane miles of highway, interstate and state highway, better than 3,000 bridges. So what we did then was assign one of the unimpacted districts to correlate with one of the impacted districts and move resources up into those areas to try to have a team sport where we had everything we could have on the ground working. Let me back up and go into the pre-treatment. You will remember the storm we had back in 2021, which was not quite as severe as this, but it did impact a big part of the state. And that year, MDOT, I went back and looked, and we used about 25,000 gallons of brine, which is a salt mixed with water to pre-treat the roads to try to mitigate some of the impacts of ice. That was about 25,000 gallons we used that year. Just in this storm alone, we used over 210,000 gallons of brine to go out. As we talked about early on, while this can help, the rain that came with this storm was a challenge, because if you put this stuff out in the wrong time and rain hits it, it can wash it off and it has no impact. So in many areas, we were waiting for the rain to pass. We got the chemicals out. We put that on the roadway to the greatest extent that we could, and then the storm came. When we started dispatching our people from central and south Mississippi into the other regions, we were dealing with just catastrophic issues. I mean, where the ice came through, it had hit. And I want to remind you that if you get 2 inches of ice in your yard on ground, due to the temperatures in the ground and stuff like that, that stuff it will start kind of seeping into the soil. It can melt. On pavement, it starts freezing and building. 2 inches of ice on the ground can mean about 6 or 8 inches on a sheet of pavement. And with the temperatures getting as low as they did for as long as they did, that presented probably the biggest challenge we had, because you can't plow ice. You have to have some method in place that causes it to break down enough that a grader and a snowplow can push it off. And our resources were stretched across this area, and the bottom line, too, is our state's not always equipped for storms of this magnitude, because they only come along every 20, 30 years. But, you know, the hardest thing that we had to battle, I guess, through this was a lot of misinformation that came out, some of which came from some very disappointing sources. But I've heard that, you know, we pulled people off of 55 or 22, that we had crews there, we pulled them off and sent them to other areas of the state. That's not true. We never pulled anybody off of anywhere. We only added to the forces everywhere we had in every way that we can. When people got pulled off of certain areas, it only happened when folks, our crews over in northeast Mississippi, started completing their task and getting highways open, because they had the temperatures, they had things that were allowed them to, they weren't hit as bad around the Tupelo area as, say, over in the Panola County area. We were able to wrap that up and start moving those forces westward into the I-55 corridor, if you will. But through this whole time, one of the areas that nobody seemed to want to talk about was the Mississippi Delta, that was completely locked down as well. And we had forces over there working to try to open up the highways and the roads and all of that. And the situation that happened on the interstate, I think, put so much focus in that particular area that some of the other areas that were impacted just as badly were not making it into the news, so to speak. And so we were fighting on a lot more fronts.
Just for a second, so you had a lot of people that realized what was going on highway or Interstate 55 that tried to jump over and get on Highway 51, which was in about the same condition that 55 was, and didn't necessarily make it any better.
Well, and you had other issues. You know, we had a lane of the interstates that were passable, and through this whole thing, we talked about the difference in passable and safe or normal.
Right.
And you had some places, and I mean, the DPS has the reports on these, where some 18-wheelers would get on these routes and would have trouble getting traction up a hill, and one 18-wheeler driver stopped his truck, unhooked from his trailer, and left it sitting right in the middle of the interstate. We had another guy that, of no fault of his own, he stopped on the I-55 to get out to check his rig and check everything. When he got back in, having stopped, he could no longer get traction. And so then he started having that trouble. Then there was an 18-wheeler behind him that got tired of waiting and went off into the ice to get around and jackknifed. So there are a lot of things that happen that would be out of most people's control. But when we look at that situation and what other options we have, you know, when you go up to the northern states that deal with this weather a lot, they may put out 50, 60,000 tons of salt. We put out about 4,000, which is a big number for us. So there are some things that if you've got time next, I can talk about moving forward. But I want to return to the interstate.
Okay, we'll certainly do that, and I'll let you just kind of give you a heads up. One of the things that people talked about was what was different in Tennessee, because it felt like once you crossed the state line on Interstate 55 into Tennessee, the roads improved. Was there something different that happened in the state just to our north? We'll continue that conversation with Brad White, Executive Director at the Mississippi Department of Transportation. On the other side of this time out, it's Mornings with Richard Cross, presented by Community Bank, rooted in our community, communitybank.net. Back with you, it is Mornings with Richard Cross, SuperTalk Mississippi. Brad White is my guest, Executive Director of the Mississippi Department of Transportation. We're going to try to squeeze a lot into this last 5 minutes of the hour. You said you wanted to go back to Interstate 55 and wrap something up there.
Well, I mean, we can look at what happened if we had shut down the interstate. First of all, we don't have the capability of shutting the interstate down. When it was closed, we just closed two ends with the highway patrol. The exits were still open, and 18-wheelers were still using the exits, even though they could see traffic stopped there.
Okay.
The capabilities to close it down completely didn't exist. But let's say they did. Shutting that down would have only sent those 18-wheelers all off into the other arteries of the state where there are highways with driveways on them. These are the homes that we were trying to get emergency vehicles to. These are the homes that the power companies were trying to get to. The worst possible thing that could have happened would have been to send that traffic out into the hinterlands of the state where all of the other first responders were trying to do the most important work that went on. I mentioned what northern states that have this weather regularly do, and that is that they have just exponentially more materials to treat with. Okay. We are looking at what it would take for us to purchase that type of material because of the humidity in the south. We're going to need climate-controlled facilities to put them in. We can house them around for events that come every 20 years or so. And we have to make the decision, is that a cost that the taxpayers are okay with us investing in to have that to where we could just, in a situation like this, just dump materials up and down the road. But you mentioned the weather in Memphis. I mean, the short answer is they didn't get the same weather that other parts of Mississippi did. Same reason Jackson didn't look the way. The weather was different. One of the things I noticed when I was in MEMA,
so Memphis was more sleet and snow, whereas right around the state line was kind of that line where you had primarily freezing rain.
If you get over into central Tennessee, they had decided that's where you get into the weather that we had.
Right.
And
I was in Nashville over the weekend, and they were hammered by ice as well.
Right. And as we've said from the beginning, you can't plow ice. But, we saw this when I was at MEMA, and they were showing the map of where all the power outages were. And DeSoto County, Tunica County, they weren't lit up on that map. It was a swath that went across the river through Bolivar County, some of the Delta counties, all through Panola County, Marshall County, and across to Alcorn County and out. The weather was different, and therefore the way that you're able to treat it is different.
Okay.
So that's the short answer.
You've talked a lot about it's hard to plow or almost impossible to plow ice. If you get equipment onto it fast, does that give you as opposed to waiting until the weather event ends, and that may not have been what happened, can you get there and have more of an effect if you're immediately plowing as the ice is actually coming down or the freezing rain is coming down, or am I asking a bad question there?
No, I mean, that wouldn't be how it worked. The ideal situation would be we would have the type of backlog of materials that you would be able to do the pre-treatment that we did, and that you would be able just to pour tonnage of salt on it or slag and things like that to try to help with traction and other things.
Okay.
The only way to remove the ice is to have the right equipment there, the right materials to put on it, and the right temperatures to get it to change its composition into the slush stuff that you're able to push off. I mean, I could show you videos of where we would have two motor graders, snow plows, and salt trucks running over a section with blades down and not making a dent until the temperatures got right and the amount of salt that was down started, causing that to slush up like that.
Yeah. Lessons learned. I mean, you talked about, there needs to be a conversation about, do we want to invest in materials that are not only available but are stockpiled so that you can almost go overboard in terms of treating or pre-treating roads. What else? What else will you take away from this that you can apply to the future?
Some of it is continuing to invest in our workforce, having the manpower to get out. I mean, we have focused, the last 5 years, we've been allowed by the legislature to do salary adjustments throughout the agency, and that's helped. 5 years ago, when I came back to MDOT, we were bleeding employees. Our maintenance forces had shrunk drastically, along with our engineering staff. So having the resources and the amount of manpower and equipment to be out is helpful. But the legislature has been working with us on rebuilding that, and we're in that process of doing that. Reviewing the types of materials that are used in the states that deal with this type of weather regularly, and determining whether or not there is a value for us to maintain that type of reserve. And if we do, then that means we, unlike those states, are going to have to construct some facilities that are capable of keeping the humidity out to where that we can do that.
And that's simply because if you've got a big stockpile of salt and it is exposed over, I don't know, the course of 3 or 4 years to the changing humidity and changing temperatures.
Moisture gets in it and it starts losing its value to us. So we would have to have invest in the type of facilities that could house it. And all of that's something that we may very well do. It's just going to have a price tag tied to it, and we'll determine how to make that work. But I do want to brag on our people. I hear the music. I wanted to check on our folks that were out all through the night on equipment and doing all this through the weekend. I thought I would find some of them at home tending to their families. They were at their churches handing out food. I mean, we have some of the best folks in the world on the front line, and I can't say enough good about our people.
Brad, I appreciate your transparency and your willingness to come on and talk about what has been, I know, a difficult week and a half, but thank you for your time, and always enjoy the visits.
Thank you, Rich. I appreciate you.